Have you ever thought about it? What was the harshest form of punishment humanity ever devised? The punishment I'm about to tell you about is the kind that makes you say, "I'm glad I never even imagined this." It was one of the most inhumane punishments you could possibly conceive. And in English law, it was the most extreme penalty that could be imposed on those guilty of high treason. High treason, not just a crime, but a direct challenge to the monarch himself. Those who were subjected to this punishment were no longer seen as human. They were considered disposable. Every ounce of pain and brutality they would endure was deliberate. A clear message was being sent to the crowd: fear. And that message continued like this: a normal man does not die 3 times, but the despicable do. This form of punishment in law was applied only to men, because exposing a woman's body in this way was considered indecent. For that reason, women had 2 forms of punishment: being burned at the stake or execution by beheading. This did not make death any lighter. The law was crystal clear. The moment the prisoner was taken out of prison, the torture would begin. He would be dragged behind a horse until he was half dead. Then he would be hanged. Afterward, he would be cut down, his abdomen slit open, his internal organs removed and burned by the executioner. Finally, his head would be severed and his body divided into 4 parts. These parts would be displayed in places clearly visible to the public, serving as a message. To make that message even more striking, the executioner would remove the prisoner's heart from his chest and shout, "Behold the heart of a traitor," holding it up for the crowd to see. This punishment consisted of stages: dragging, hanging, and being quartered. Today, we will witness one of the harshest punishments of the Middle Ages. So, are you ready? Dragging. A prisoner could be dragged from the prison to the place of execution. Sometimes this journey could be very long, if he could endure it. Along this road, crowds would line up, shouting at the prisoner being dragged along the ground, hurling insults, some throwing stones, others kicking him. If you were part of that crowd, would you have acted the same way? In short, for many prisoners, their bodies were already battered before the real torture even began. In later periods, instead of being tied to a horse, prisoners were dragged on a sled or a wooden board, their hands and feet bound, hanging. And this stage was where the rope was placed around the neck. But the goal was not to kill. It was to turn execution into torture. How was that possible? You might be asking. At first, the rope was placed around the neck, and the prisoner felt as if his body was being lifted into the air. But as the rope tightened, the body's reactions became increasingly horrifying. The eyes bulged, the heart felt as if it would burst from the chest, and the legs thrashed desperately in search of escape. And in his mind, everything he had lived through would pass like a film reel. The pressure inside the head increased, as if it were about to explode. And just as consciousness was about to fade, you realized you no longer had control over your body. At that moment, the body released what was inside: urine and feces. And then, before death, the prisoner would be lowered to the ground, As I said, this was about letting him taste death, torturing through death itself. After hitting the ground, the breath you took burned in your lungs, and you realized you were still alive. At this stage, dying would have been luck, strange, but true. For them, it was a form of escape, because what came next was beyond imagination. The second drawing, Dısembowelment. This stage was the Dısembowelment. The criminal's abdomen was opened, cut from the groin to the breastbone. The intestines were removed and burned before the prisoner's own eyes. Later, the law added this phrase: "Your limbs shall be severed, your bowels taken out, and burned while you yet live." Yes, the sexual organs were included as well. At this point, losing consciousness was a blessing. But many victims were still awake and watched their own organs burn. Finally, the heart was removed. The executioner burned it as well, then severed the head. As the crowd watched this scene, they swayed between disgust and fascination. If imagining this in your mind makes you shudder, you are not alone. Quarterıng. The final stage was absolute humiliation. The body was cut into 4 parts, sent to different regions of the country along with the head, and displayed at city gates. The purpose of this stage was a display of power. If you do not obey, this will be your end. Heads were most commonly displayed at London Bridge, Westminster Hall, and the Tower of London. Conclusion: hanging, drawing, and quartering was designed to inflict pain for as long as possible. Purpose of the punishment was clear: to enforce obedience, and this message was applied to those seen as the most despicable, traitors to the state. The state used this punishment as a weapon of fear. In this way, rebellions would be crushed, and no one would dare attempt them. Elizabethan Lord Chief Justice Edward Coke described this process as divine butchery. Do you think so too? Fortunately, this punishment was abolished from English law in 1870. But being ruled by fear, that has never truly disappeared from history. Thank you for watching until the end. How do you think you would have felt witnessing these events at the time? Let's talk in the comments.